Hey folks, my name is Krishna. If you're new to the channel, welcome. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can make a sci-fi based landscape using shapes. So let's get right into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a blank canvas. I use 5100 pixels wide by 3300 pixels tall. It's a landscape canvas, and I use 600 pixels per inch as my default canvas size. Now, the way this is going to work is I'm just going to show you some of the techniques that I'm using for that specific example, and you can apply this to pretty much any type of landscape that you're trying to create. Let's start off with using our circular selection tool here. So I'm going to fill this in with some type of a color. I'll pick kind of a rusty orangish color. Doesn't matter what color you choose here. And I'm going to make a new layer above this layer. And this is where I'm going to start adding some shading to this circle. I want to give it some volume. So in Photoshop, or if you're using another tool like Krita or something along those lines, you want to look for a soft pressure brush. So I'm going to pick this big soft brush here. It's a tool preset, but you can also find this particular brush. It is part of the built-in Photoshop library. In fact, if you were to look at general brushes here, if you choose soft, round, pressure, opacity, and flow, and you give it a fairly decent size, I'm going to make this size just a little bit larger than the actual object itself, and I'm going to pick a darker value, and I'm just going to come back in and I'm going to paint, almost creating like a spherical-like shape on the inside. And I'm going to come back in with some slightly darker values, like so. So I'm kind of moving my hand around in a very circular fashion. Let's go ahead and round this out. And we've got, make it a little bit bigger here. There we go. So we've taken this flat shape and we've kind of given it more dimension or form. So next up, what I'll do is on a new layer, I'm going to go ahead and create some extensions that span out from it. So I'll just pick my rectangular or polygonal lasso tool rather. I'm going to drag these out. And you can see that these selections actually taper towards the spherical shape. And I'll pick a darker value like so. And I want to cap these ends here and make them round so it looks like the metallic objects here are actually penetrating the sphere. So there's many ways that you can do this. I'm just going to be lazy and just use a round freehand lasso tool and just kind of make it look a little bit more rounded and cut from that. And then I want to give a little bit of distinction between, so this is still a set of shapes, right? These lines are still shapes. I want to give a sense of form to those shapes. So I'm going to Command or Control click on the shapes that I have here. And then I'll sample this orangish value. I'll use that soft round pressure opacity brush. And the trick here is I don't want the brush to be super big. I want it to be just large enough to where it's just a little bit bigger than the largest part of that shape, if that makes sense, right? So I'm going to just come back in and paint the top like so. I'll repeat that process here with the middle. And I'll do the same thing with the lower one. So what this is doing is it's giving a sense of roundness, right? Very, very quick way to do that. I'm looking back at the cast shadow here. I think that I want to make this even darker. So if I Command click, go back to my shadow layer for the sphere and pick a black value. Or something near black. I'm going to have something that looks like this. And I really like this particular approach here because I'm isolating every one of my shapes onto their own specific layer. It gives me complete control as opposed to trying to put everything on one distinct layer. So now that I have this basic shape set up right here, I've got something that looks spherical, got some, I guess, cylindrical shapes that appear to be emanating into the sphere. So that part looks pretty good. Let's go back in now and let's give it some kind of a skyline. I'm going to pick something that is going to work well with the orange here. Maybe I'll pick a bluish color. I'll fill this in. And what I want to do next is I'm just going to use the freeform lasso tool, make a series of shapes that look like little sharp incisions, if you will. And holding down Shift adds to your selection. And now I'll hit Control J and then move the lightness down. You can see that we're creating lines with the lasso tool. Command J, Command U. And I've got some hint of an environment, and I can go ahead and tweak this to my heart's content. From there, so we've got something that's in the immediate foreground, we've got something that's in the background, or I guess midground, because I'm going to create a background element here, and I'm going to actually put some kind of a lake. So I'm going to use my rectangular selection tool or my rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to extend this out like so. Command J, Command U. Make this somewhat darker and a little bit more saturated. I want this to look like some type of watery structure here, even though I don't have any textures applied to that. So I've got this mountain, I've got this watery shape here. I'll make a new layer and I'm going to add some ripples. And this is the wrong brush to use for that because it's a very round, soft brush. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and pick one of my custom brushes, which is the shaved ice brush. It's a nice clean brush that you can use. It's available as part of a brush pack that I'm selling on my website. I'll put a link to that in the description for this video. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key and just create the hint of some kind of watery surface. So I have that in place. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer directly above my sky layer here. And I'll use white. And I'll go back to that big, soft, round pressure opacity brush. I have that saved here as a tool preset. So I'll choose KMS Big Soft Round Brush. And I'll come back in and I can lighten that up a little bit to give a sense of environment. You can see how that works. So far so good. It looks a little bit boring though. I mean, there's got to be some more visual interest here on the actual structure. We don't know, for example, what it's made out of. Is it metal? Is it, made out of clay? Those types of things. So this is where we get to start adding some design elements. So I'm going to go ahead and make a brand new layer, and I'll put this layer above the initial circle that I have. And I'm going to come back in now, and I'm going to add some detail. I'm going to use my shaved ice brush. I'll pick a dark value here, and I'll just add some piping or some other interesting visual elements that can be used to suggest that this has some complexity associated with it. I might even throw some wires, right? Add some kind of a opening or a hatch, like other elements that can give us a sense of scale, perhaps. Like maybe this is like something that someone will walk along. We don't know. Maybe some of the wires extend down from one plank to the next. So I'm going to just kind of rinse and repeat that process. I'm going to have some that are going to be a little bit thicker than others. maybe something like that. Holding down the Shift key. And I want to add those caps in, so what I'll have to do is essentially go to a layer above those pipes and just add a little bit of a rounded form here, like so. This one I don't need anything on. And now that I have that, I want to add some form to the actual structure. So one nice way, like if I try to make a line, you can see that it's going to spill outside of this shape that I have here. If I Command or Control click on the actual shape and on a new layer, if I were to actually draw some rounded shapes like so, it only allows me to draw lines on the actual shapes. This is where I can restrict my lines to a specific region on the canvas. So I've got these things here. Let me zoom in. I can throw some rivets down. So the implication here is this is now something that is perhaps made out of metal. And I love this particular approach, just using these very simple shapes to create form and structure. I think a lot of times when people start creating backgrounds, they get overwhelmed because it's really kind of like, where do you start? How do you begin? And my suggestion for that would be just start with shapes. You know, have a primary shape. In this case, the primary shape is the spherical shape. And I've got some secondary shapes, which are basically these pipes that are coming into it. And then I've got some tertiary shapes, which are just these extra doodads that I've added on top there. Now, I do want to go back in and add some definition to this particular structure here. And I'm going to think of this as like having some kind of like, it looks kind of like a basketball, but maybe not. So I've got some kind of round shapes here. I'll break into that form. Maybe I'll add one piece up here. And maybe I'll add a little bit of an opening, something like that. And now what I can do is, since I've got those lines on a separate layer, I can Command click on that. Command clicking basically allows you to quickly make a selection for that object that's on that layer. And then I'll come back in and I'll add maybe some white or yellowish colors to show that there is some internal activity. Maybe there's some circuitry or some lights or something, you know, something that gives it a sense of depth. So you can see that it's somewhat glowing here. So now to finish this off, to go ahead and give this a more rustic metallic type of look or something that's more weathered, I have a collection of paint assets. This is one that I use quite a bit. There's a collection, they're called watercolor textures. So this particular texture here has a lot of these nice, light, medium, and dark orangish values. Kind of almost looks like rust, right? So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to reposition this in such a way where I think it's going to make the most sense. Let me just Control click. So you can see that that's the selection that I have there. So I'll just move this around and Control click. And if I now go back up to my texture, and if I hit Command J, it pops that to its own separate layer. And then I can choose a layer style. So if I choose something like overlay, you can see it gives this nice rusted feel. Overlay is a little bit too bright for me, but soft lights tends to be pretty good. So let me switch to soft light there. And now this has a sense of character. It has this kind of rusty, weird quality to it, which I think looks pretty neat. I'm going to reapply that to the pipes themselves. So if I move this texture up onto its own layer and just reposition it like so, and maybe I'll rotate it. I'll hit enter, and I'll command click on those pipes, go back to the texture layer, command J, and now you can see that those textures are filling in that space. And I can choose multiply here. If I choose soft light, I can see it a little bit better. Hard light gives it a little bit more contrast, but it just makes it too bright. It pulls the focus away from the globe. So, and you can just see what the different layer styles are going to do here. Kind of like pin light, but I want the effect to be a little bit less prominent. So what I'll do is I'll just drop its opacity to about 40%. And now you can see that I've got, it's kind of like a rusting set of pipes that are feeding into the back end of this globe. And one thing that I also want to do here is I want to bring the shadow and make it a little bit darker. So I'm moving the shadow layer up above to where we have some good contrast. Now, one thing I recommend doing is checking your grayscale values. And what I mean by that is that the colors, they seem to look okay, but I want to be able to see what this looks like in a grayscale value. So if I go up to View, if I go to Proof Setup, and if I choose Custom, there's an option here under Device to Simulate called Working Gray. If I choose that, this allows me to see my design or my illustration in grayscale. So I can see that I have suitable contrast. It's very easy to distinguish one object from the next. And I can toggle this now by hitting Command Y, or if you're in Windows, Control Y. So this gives you a really nice way to see whether or not your colors are actually working. Now, the one thing I haven't really included here is there's the hint of a light source. There's no explicit light source. There's no like sun or moon or lantern or what have you. But we do have this kind of light that's on the horizon here. And I think that's kind of like suggesting some atmosphere. What I also want to do is, because this water is kind of a uniform color, I could leave it as is. But I think what I want to do is I want to command click on that. A water layer, I'll make a new layer above it. I'll set it to multiply and I'll pick a dark blue. Let me just go up here, dark blue. And I'll pick that soft round pressure opacity brush. Let's go back here. Soft round pressure opacity and flow. Of course, I got to crank that guy up. And I'll just come back in and softly paint. So now we are having a little bit more variation in the water. It's going from dark, and maybe, just maybe, I want to add some lighter values as the water meets the horizon line here. So I'll just come back up. And add some lighter values there. So in this way, now I have something that has some form and some structure. And of course, you can continue to take this even further along as you wish. But this is just a few simple sets of techniques that you can use. Not very difficult to work with at all. And you're simply just using existing shapes. And if you want to, break up this globe shape because it looks maybe a little bit too flat or too boring or what have you, you can always come back in. You can add some antennas. You can, add some really interesting structural elements to kind of break up. Maybe this is more of like a relay tower, something along those lines. And it just basically adds some shape variation and visual interest. So if you found this video to be useful, please consider giving it a thumbs up so more folks can find it. And as always, thanks for watching the videos. Let me know what you'd like to see coming up next. And let me know if these techniques are working for you. So thanks so much for watching. Catch you in the next one. See ya.